The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring by J.R.R. Tolkien. I have been afraid to do this video for over a year. I finished reading this for the second time around this time last year. The first time was over 20 years ago. And after reading it the second time, I wanted to do a review. But every time I thought about it, I became nervous and anxious, since this book is everything to me when it comes to fantasy. I would not be the person that I am today without this book and The Hobbit. Because before this, in 1999, the only fantasy experiences that I had would have been Dragonheart the movie with Sean Connery and Dennis Quaid, which is cheesy but a guilty pleasure. The Black Cauldron from Disney, and Robin Hood, if you count that, because it has bows and arrows. But that would have been about it. I also knew about King Arthur, Excalibur, the Knights of the Round Table. I don't know necessarily how I consumed that story because I don't remember watching anything until I was older than that. But I knew of that story, and I don't think my father had read anything to me either. I think it would have literally been word of mouth, hearing it somewhere and asking my father about that story, and he would tell me. I remember my father was a great storyteller when I would ask him about something that he knew about, and he would explain things and I would imagine them back then. But it wasn't something that really made me want to consume everything fantasy. Having read The Hobbit and Fellowship, though, completely changed that. When I was 13 and I read this, I wanted everything fantasy. I got into Dungeons and Dragons. I looked at video games and said, I want something in that setting. So I played Legend of Dragoon, Final Fantasy IX, two of my favorite games of all time. I watched the movies, absolutely loved them. Watched The Fellowship 3 times in theaters, and back then I never went back to the theater to watch something twice, and I went to it 3 times because I needed to. I loved it so much. It just completely changed my life, where now I'm writing a novel that is in a fantasy world, and I don't think I would be writing it without Lord of the Rings, honestly. It's just not possible. But what I really like rereading it is that at 13, I loved The Hobbit. At 14, I started Fellowship, and I was okay with it. I continued on, read The Two Towers, started Return of the King, and then stopped because I think I started reading Harry Potter, and that was more up to my speed at that time. Read the 4 books there that were out at the time, up to Goblet of Fire. And then I think I started reading Wheel of Time at 15, and I just never went back to Lord of the Rings because at the time, I thought that there was too much detail and not enough battles. I wanted more battles. And now, as an adult, I can appreciate that it's not about the battle scene. It is about the characters, the conversations, and how true they stay to each other after dealing with battles or during battles, and what choices they make. Oh, I absolutely love this. This is incredible. Tolkien is a master, obviously, at world building and the lore that he creates and the history that he creates for everything, for locations, for characters, for races, for different ages, for specific items that they have in here. And while it might be a little bit too much sometimes, I loved every little bit of it because it made that world open up way more. And it's really because of his writing style. Without the way that he writes, I don't think that any other author could necessarily do the same that he did, where you're describing something for pages on end and making it still sound interesting, unique, and different. He's an incredible author. He really is. I always hear that it's his world building that is the top stuff. And while I do agree with that, it's the way he writes too. It's by far that. You cannot write an epic fantasy book like this where the focus isn't on battles at all and still make it that good, because this is excellent. I loved it. And while I won't go necessarily into major spoilers, I do want to talk about certain characters. So I'll give my rating, and then we're going to dive into minor spoilers for Fellowship. So I will give this a 4.5 out of 5 stars, and I will give it a 5 stars on Goodreads. This is one of the highest ratings that I've ever given, and I think that when I reread this again in a few years, because I do want to go back to it again after rereading everything, but I want to read more of Middle-earth after I finish the actual Lord of the Rings. But I do want to read this every few years because I think that each time that I read it, I'll appreciate it a little bit more. So 4.5 out of 5 stars, 5 stars on Goodreads. Now we're going to go into just a few minor spoilers regarding this world, specifically some of the characters and some of the chapters, because my favorite chapter in this book is chapter 2, The Shadow of the Past. And that is when Gandalf is talking to Frodo about Sauron and the rings. And it's just literally history and lore. And that was my favorite chapter of the entire novel. Talking about something in the past. Normally, that is the most boring way to describe something. You don't really want to delve too much in the past. You generally want to stay in the present because that's where action is moving. That's where you're moving along. That's where you get the feeling that you're moving forward. And here we are talking about something that happened in the past. And I felt like I was there inside that hobbit hole listening to this conversation. And I loved it. I absolutely loved it. Gandalf is by far my favorite character. I used to be Strider, but right now I think that especially Fellowship, Gandalf is my favorite character. The way that he also just weaves in and out of the story because he's trying to figure out what's going on. He's such a cool character. Another chapter that I really liked is The House of Tom Bombadil. That character is freaking awesome. I love that Tom is arguably potentially the most powerful character in the entire Lord of the Rings. I haven't read the Silmarillion, so I don't know where power levels are necessarily there, but you can tell that Tom Bombadil is incredibly powerful because the ring, he's the only character where the ring doesn't entice him. And they even mentioned that in Rivendell. Why don't we just give the ring to Tom Bombadil? And I think Gandalf is the one that says, well, if we gave it to him, he wouldn't really realize how powerful it is and how important that it is because he'll just look at it as an item. So he might lose it, or people could go over and get it because he won't necessarily see the true value in it because he has other things to deal with. More so like nature, it seems, that's what his main pleasure and goal in life is to just live this life with his wife out in the woods, tending to the forest and the world about him, but not dealing with men's affairs, which very much is the ring. But they offer the ring to him and he's like, nah, I don't want that. I have no use for that. And he's not enticed at all. Whereas Gandalf, who is arguably one of the most positive characters and good actual characters, like lawful good characters in the entire novel and series. And he's like, yeah, if I got the ring, it would just be game over. Like I could be a bigger menace than Sauron potentially if I got this ring. And there's a very interesting video that you can watch, like what if Gandalf had taken the ring, and it's a fan fiction on YouTube here, but the story is really awesome. It's really well done. I can't remember who created that, but if you get the chance, search up if Gandalf got the ring. It's really interesting. So those chapters right there were really good. And then we get into the Barrow Downs. I believe chapter 8 is another great. The Barrow Wights are freaking creepy. And I couldn't remember reading that as a 14-year-old. So it was a really big treat for me rereading that as an adult and being like, that was amazing. Is it? Fog on the Barrow Downs, chapter 8, right after. And Tom Bombadil saves them from the Barrow Wights, who sound like extremely creepy creatures. And Tom Bombadil just like shows up and they dispatch because they're afraid of him. It would be really cool to see if like a Nazgul has showed up and what Tom Bombadil would do and what would happen in that instance, right? Rivendell is an excellent. Oh, when they go to the inn, I mean, at the sign of the Prancing Pony, what an incredible chapter that is. That one in Strider, probably Strider. At the sign of the Prancing Pony, Strider and a knife in the dark, as they're heading towards the inn and they get to this town where it's more so men, and this is the furthest by far that they've ever gone, that they've never experienced really. I don't think they had really experienced men outside of Gandalf, who technically isn't even a man. And the introduction of Strider. Strider is the whole reason why I'm called silverkyle. I don't even really want to talk about this, but I was 13 years old. I loved Strider. And to me, I always saw him in gray cloaks, right? Like dark gray cloaks. So I would say silver because it sounded a little bit cooler. And it was Gandalf the Grey, so Silver Strider. And I would say that Legolas was Golden Legolas. So I was Silver Strider. My brother was Golden Legolas. Our first emails were Silver Strider and Golden Legolas. Oh my goodness. All right, mine might have been Austin Powers 27, honestly, but then afterwards I got Silver Strider, and eventually I went with silverkyle. And I just kept that name. It's been with me for over 20 years now, that name. So, and it's because of Strider, because I thought that he was just such an interesting character. And he's another excellent character that they write throughout this novel and going forward, because I've started The Two Towers recently. And Strider and Gandalf are just such good characters. You're getting a little bit more to, well, I don't want to talk about the movies too much. Frodo in the movies is okay. I do think he's written a lot better in this series. Sam in both the movies and the books are excellent. I mean, they nailed that correctly. But Pippin and Merry are very interesting characters and very important, especially Merry, I feel, in the first few chapters. The other thing too, the first chapter, an unexpected party, I think. Is that what it's called, or what is the first chapter called? It's when Bilbo, a long expected party. They're preparing a birthday party. And I'm like, this is awesome. This is all the dealings with preparing for it and figuring out what hobbits like and how hobbits are. Perfect introduction to that, I think. And nothing really big is happening at all. You go along afterwards, and then they have to deal with the estate because everything went to Frodo when Bilbo left. And it's just like, I'm here for everything, and they buy another house, and they have to go under this specific. And I think like years, like decades pass, I think, in between Bilbo leaving and Frodo getting everything, and they talk about the ring, and they're like, what are we going to do now? And it's like, I think 17, I can't remember the exact amount, but I think it's like 17 years or something that transpire in between that. And it's just, we're just hanging out, and now we're going to get the story going. I like that kind of stuff. Rivendell was another good one where we kind of meet like the council, and they try to figure out what they want to do, which is when they do mention Tom Bombadil and saying that, it won't work if we give it to him. And I also really liked right before, I think, the council, the flight to the ford, where they're kind of trying to escape the Nazgul. Weathertop is another great scene. One scene specifically when Gandalf, like Strider and the hobbits, see on, I believe it's Weathertop, like a bunch of lightning, and it looks like fireworks to them, I think. And you find out later that was Gandalf battling the Nazgul. That is awesome. You didn't even need to describe the battle there. Just Gandalf talking to them later when they meet up with him afterwards, and he says, that was me when I was a few days ahead of you, or a few days behind. I can't remember which one it is, but they see him, I believe, at Weathertop, and they see a bunch of explosions and stuff, and they realize they find out later that that's Gandalf. And just that setting where you didn't have to explain the battle is awesome, and you're able to fully imagine it in your mind. That's what it is with Tolkien, that you don't need to describe it. You can just, that's not the main part. It's the before and after, and where that ties into the story. Incredible storyteller, just phenomenal. But I did like one scene that was kind of action oriented when Frodo has been attacked by the Nazgul at Weathertop, and they're riding towards Rivendell, and I think they meet up with another elf, and I can't remember his name, but Strider and he are working together as the Nazgul are around them, and they're trying to get there with their horses. Excellent chapter. Loved that chapter. Just, you really felt that they were in peril and that they were at their necks and just nipping away. It was really well done. I really enjoyed that chapter. So that's the Fellowship of the Ring. I cannot wait to dive more into this world. I am about halfway through the Two Towers already. I started it and I just couldn't stop. And I basically said, start the Two Towers and then you can go and talk about Lord of the Rings again. Started the Two Towers, got a little bit too far than I anticipated, but I'm absolutely loving it. And if you get the chance, I feel illustrations by Alan Lee totally help bring this world to life. Like, this here, for the troll that they see from The Hobbit, is incredible. Right here, Rivendell. I believe that that's probably Rivendell. And throughout this, the copy that I have here, every once in a while, you'll get some more illustrations by Alan Lee. And it's just absolutely, that illustrator completely understands Lord of the Rings. I have seen so much from his work that when I think of Lord of the Rings, a lot of it has to do with Alan Lee for the look of it. And I think that has really, not the greatest. I think when he depicts people, they're okay, but I like a lot more the landscapes, because the landscapes of the Middle Earth is very different. A little bit darker in some aspects, but also a little bit like in the areas where it's very nice. It is majestic and beautiful in certain areas as well. So that's good though. Whoa, that's creepy. His illustrations have really taken a toll on how I see the Lord of the Rings and imagine it in my mind. Right outside Moria. Just incredible stuff. So if you get the chance and you do get to get something with illustrations by Alan Lee, or even if the book itself just has illustrations at the very beginning of Alan Lee, it's worth it in my opinion. So that is the Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring. I cannot wait to dive more into this. I'm hoping to finish The Two Towers this month along with Return of the King. So I'm hoping that within the next few weeks, I'll have Fellowship, Two Towers, and Return of the King all rated. Thank you all for watching. You have been bearded in. Beardage.